Okay, this evening we have Dr. Gordon Dammann, who spoke to us a couple of years ago. In fact, at that time, as I remember, it was primarily on battlefield medicine at that time, because Gordon has a museum which specializes in information about battlefield medicine, written several books about it. I recommend them. We have copies of it in our library here. If anyone wants to come over and use our research center, which is free to come over almost at any time, just give us a call. Tonight he is going to speak to us about one of the major Civil War battles, this one being in Antietam, where he is an official guide at Antietam. So you are going to be speaking to or listening to someone who really knows what he is talking about. And so with that, one other thing. After it's all done, free food. And there is no charge for riding the elevator. And the question I'm asked most tonight about the elevator was, how many pounds can you get in there, or how many people? I will tell you right now, you can put as many people as you want, so long as it doesn't exceed 750 pounds total. If it goes that much, you hit the top, the bell rings, and you all fall down. So with that, I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Gordon Dammann.
Thanks, Jim. I bring greetings from the Lena Area Historical Society. We're a sister historical societies belonging to McConnell, and it's kind of neat to see how these historical societies have grown. We started ours in 1981 on a whim of myself and a few other people. I know Jim and the people here have done a great job over here, and this elevator amazes me. Put that thing in now, how he gets that going to an older building, how that works. And super job, and you should be proud of whatever is going on here in Cedarville. So it's a great honor to come over here and talk to you about my favorite place. Everybody has a favorite place in the Civil War. I gotta move my wife's purse here though. First thing you talk about, you mentioned Civil War. When I was in practice in Lena, I just retired a year and a half ago, and you talk about, Civil War, what do you think about it? Well, where are you going to go visit a Civil War battlefield? What do you think? Gettysburg. That's what 90% of the people think about is Gettysburg. Not happening. 1863, we're going to celebrate the 150 of that in a month and a half on July 1, 2, and 3. And I'll give you a little advice. Do not go there on July 1, 2, and 3 of this year. It's going to be mass confusion out there. It's mass confusion out there anyway. But it's going to be something else. So go see it in October or later on if you want to see Gettysburg. But my favorite place, and we're going to talk about that tonight, is Antietam. The Antietam battlefield is in western Maryland. It's 30 miles west of Frederick, 70 miles west of Baltimore. About 50 miles south and west of Gettysburg, and about 50 miles north of Washington, D.C. And we'll see some pictures of it. We're going to take you on a little tour. I made up this tour, a visit, for people that have never been there, and how to visit the battlefield, and what you're going to encounter there. And we'll show you some places at the end. If you go out there and stay, and things like that. I'm lucky enough 6 years ago to become a licensed guide out there, and just got back last week. I spent 2 weeks out there guiding for 2 weeks. I had the opportunity to guide the Chicago Civil War Roundtable for 3 days, which were out there, and that was a super event because they are the knowledgeable people. But being a guide is kind of cool because you never know what you're going to get. It's like a box of chocolate in that famous movie. Who's going to show up? I've had people from New Zealand, I've had people from Australia, I've had people from England, all over the United States. In fact, the first tour last week when I was out there was, everybody knows about Airstream trailers. Those silver trailers. There was 50 of them. They had a convention out in that area, and they parked their trailers in a camp, and they all showed up at Antietam. And we had 16 of them from Texas, by God. We made sure that we showed them where the Texas Brigade fought, and a lot of them died there. But we had a good time with them. But they were from all over the country, and Sometimes we get a mother and father and 2 kids and things like that. Or we get my next big tour is on the 1st of June. We're going to have a group from Milwaukee, a high school teacher who does a great job in history, and he's bringing out 14 of his students. And we're going to do an all-day tour. So we're going to do a lot of hiking and biking and things like that around the battlefield. So it's going to be fun. But it's a great experience to show people what Antietam's all about. Antietam was fought on September 17th, 1862. Why was it fought? Well, in September of 1862, the Union was in a bad predicament. Abraham Lincoln probably had his darkest days on 11th September 1862. In fact, a good friend of mine just wrote a book called September Suspense, Danny Fry, who's a historian at Harper's Ferry. And he likened to 9/11 what we went through in New York City when the airliners crashed into the buildings in New York City, and the whole country was devastated by what happened. But in September 11th, 1862, Abraham Lincoln is in Washington, D.C. with a big dilemma. His Union Army has been defeated all summer by Robert E. Lee in the Peninsula and at 2nd Manassas. And now Robert E. Lee, with an army of about 50,000 men, are making an inroad into Maryland. In fact, they moved across the Potomac River, and they're in Maryland. And their objective was to get to Pennsylvania. So poor Abraham Lincoln, sitting in Washington, D.C., is getting a call for help from the governor of Pennsylvania, from Governor Curtin, says, I need troops. We need troops to put down, otherwise they're going to be in Harrisburg. And there were people in Philadelphia actually taking money out of their banks in Philadelphia and moving it to New York City because they thought the rebels were going to be in Philadelphia before too long. So here's Abraham Lincoln on September 11th. He's got a real problem. He's got that Union Army that's defeated, it's in chaos in Washington. He's got a Confederate Army that's knocking on his door, and he doesn't know if the Confederate Army is going to Baltimore, or are they going to Harrisburg, or are they going to come down to Washington, D.C.? So he's there, and he's got to put an army together. He cashiered General George McClellan a few months earlier, because George McClellan lost the Peninsula campaign in and around Richmond, and now he's got to give that army back to McClellan. And poor old Lincoln, his cabinet didn't want to do that. But Lincoln said, I have to find somebody that can bring this army together. And McClellan was an organizer. So he puts McClellan back in charge in September 2 of 1862 and tells him, you got to put this army together and save Washington. That's your basic job. Because the Confederates on September 7th are in Frederick, Maryland, within 50 miles of Washington, with an army of 50,000 men. So McClellan puts his army back together. And then the Maryland campaign happens. And then it happens at the Battle of South Mountain on the 14th of September. Lee is finally defeated. Robert E. Lee lost. You can believe that. Anybody from Virginia here? Probably that's a heresy to tell you about that, because Lee never lost. But he did lose at South Mountain. And he's pulling his troops out of that area. And he's thinking that I'm beaten. I have to go back to Virginia. And he has a problem in Harper's Ferry, but his good old buddy Stonewall Jackson, who's in command, finally takes Harper's Ferry and tells General Lee, I will be in Sharpsburg within a day, and we'll take on the Union Army. Lee pulls his troops into Sharpsburg, across the Antietam Creek, and waits for General McClellan to show. Lee is outnumbered almost 2-1, but he puts his troops up on the high grounds around Antietam, and we're going to fight the Battle of Antietam, which starts on the 17th of September, 1862. My videographer, my wife Karen, and she'll put this. And this is when you come to Antietam National Battlefield Park, established in 1890 by the War Department, and then became part of the Park Service in 1932. And it's a beautiful place. We have 3,000 acres right now. Gettysburg is 6,000 acres. But we are the second oldest battlefield. We even are older than Gettysburg. Thank the Lord. First one, the oldest battlefield is Chickamauga, down by Chattanooga. And and we're number 2, and Gettysburg's number 3, but we were established in 1890. Next. I bring my tour people out, and this is where we stand. And this is just behind the visitor center, and I'm telling them, you're looking at land as it looked like in 1862. Anybody been to Gettysburg? What'd you see there? Monuments? Hotels? McDonald's? All the riffraff and all that kind of stuff. You won't see that here. This is a pristine place. And thank the Lord, because I see somebody there with a Civil War Trust hat on, that we were able to buy this land as it came available. When at first the park was started, all we owned was a little roadways and about 10 feet on each side. And that started in 1890. And by now we have 3,000 acres and it's saved. It looks just like it did. You're just General Lee standing right here. The Union Army's just over that hillside. Antietam Creek is flowing right here. And you don't see any hotels. You don't see any McDonald's. You don't see any of this other stuff. You can see the South Mountain in the distance here. That flows all the way down 17 miles down to Harper's Ferry. So this is why it's so pretty out there. It's so beautiful, and you can actually interpret this battle and take people back in time. McClellan, when he came there, his Army of the Potomac had about almost close to 80,000 men. He had a captain on his staff who rode up to the Pry family. This is the Pry house, and rode up to the Pry family and said, "Your house is now being commandeered by the Union Army's headquarters." That captain was George Custer at that time. So the poor old Pry family, all their furniture was thrown out the back, and the Union Army pulled in there and set up the headquarters where McClellan set up his headquarters to start the battle. Next. On the 17th, or the 16th, we'll say we'll go back about 6 hours. On the 16th, late in the afternoon, McClellan took his First Corps under General Hooker, about 8,000 men, and he crossed the upper bridge and started to prepare for the battle on the 17th. These bridges were built in 1832, and I still take buses across this bridge. There's 4 bridges over to Antietam, and 3 of them, well, 2 of them still take traffic. One is the historic bridge we'll show you, and the other one was destroyed during the Johnstown flood. But these bridges were built by a man named Weaver in 1832, and it cost about $2,500 per bridge. But you can imagine the whole Union First Corps on the late afternoon of the 16th, they're moving across this bridge. This is the Antietam Creek, and they're moving in to start the battle early in the morning on the 17th. Next. Battle started actually in the North Woods. This has been a recreation. We've planted new trees in there during a group with Preservation Trust and also Save Historic Antietam, where we kind of reforested it. And the battle was actually started there in the North Woods on the morning of the 17th. Right? These are monuments to Pennsylvania troops. These are Pennsylvania troops. Now, we only have 103 monuments on the battlefield, both north and south. Where Gettysburg has over 1,000 monuments, so we're not over-monumented. But this is where the Union troops lined up on this about 5:45 in the morning of the 17th to make their attack on the Confederates. Next. Hooker had his headquarters in this barn. This is the Joseph Potenberger farm. This barn has now been restored by the National Park Service, and the farm is all in our hands. We all own it, and it's been restored, and nobody lives in it, but we do interpretations in this farm. This is the Joseph Potenberger farm, where Hooker had his headquarters the night before the battle. Next. And this is what the Union Army looked at. They started from here, and now their objective is right in here. You can't see it because of the trees, but there's a church. We're going to show you that church in a minute, called the Dunkard Church. It was a very German pacifist church. They get their name Dunkard because their baptism was a complete submersion of the body. So the Union Army is setting out at 6 o'clock in the morning, and their goal was to take that Dunkard Plateau. And if they could take that plateau by 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock, they would control the city of Sharpsburg, and General Lee would have to retreat out of that area. But this is how it would look as they started out. Next. And showing you that last picture we just showed, this is how they started out. And here is the Confederates, red, under General Stonewall Jackson, who beat the Union Army at Harper's Ferry and hightailed it back up from Harper's Ferry and set up his line of defense on the Hagerstown Road. So you can see Jackson's command all defending here, and the Union Army is now making an attack. And this is where they want. This is what they want, the Dunker Church. Next. That's the church. And it's ironic. It doesn't look like a church, does it? It looks like a school. But the Dunkers were very pacifist. They didn't want any stained glass windows, no steeples, no anything like that. No anything like that. Their church service was very simple on a Sunday morning. The families would come, the men would sit on one side of the building, the women and children on the other side. They would open the Bible. One of the elders of the church would read passages from the Bible. There would be discussion of that. And then when it was over, all the parishioners would go to one of the family's houses for a meal on Sunday afternoon, sort of like the Last Supper. But that was the Dunker Church. Next. It was built in 1853. It survived the battle, but it couldn't survive a windstorm in 1921. A great windstorm that came through that area and actually blew it all down. But a man who was a member of the church took as much of the original material back to his barn and saved a lot of the stuff. And then in 1962, the centennial of the Civil War, it was rebuilt by the National Park Service to what it is today. And they still have services in there on Sunday, and then they use it for other things, and there are weddings in there. But that is the Dunker Church. It's kind of ironic. Around this very pacifist church, 23,000 casualties are going to happen on one day. Less than 1 day.
Can we douse the lights to get a sharper picture?
Pardon?
Can we douse the lights to get
Yeah, I don't know if you can. Yeah. There you go. Cool. Okay. That's sunrise over the Dunker Church. What it looked like probably on September the 17th, 1862, early in the morning. And it was a white building, just like it is. So it was a focal point for the Union Army. They could see it, and that was what they wanted to go after. And the Confederates wanted to defend that area. Next. In between where the Union Army started and the Dunker Church was a 30-acre cornfield. It was owned by a man by the name of Miller, and he had 30 acres of corn. Now this is September. The corn is about ready to be harvested, so it's about 5.5 feet tall. It's not like we plant corn on here today. They planted corn in little mounds about 2 feet apart. So the corn wasn't as wasn't as heavy to plant as we are today. But the corn was ready to be harvested. And the Union Army is going to be chomping way through that cornfield to attack the Confederates. Next. This is the southern end of the cornfield, and the Confederate Army was down in this defilade, and they are waiting for the Union Army to come across that field, and they're going to engage them at about 6:15 in the morning. So you got Confederates lined up here, and you got Union coming from the left to right. This road was not there. This is a Park Avenue that was established later. But you can see some Union monuments here. This is a Georgia monument here. There's only 3 monuments to the Confederacy on the battlefield. So they don't have too many, but the Union had the rest of them. So this is where there's going to be an interaction in this corn. Next. And this belonged to the Miller family. Now this is the Miller house, which is now being restored by the National Park Service back to its original condition. That's why we see the scaffolding and a lot of things like that. They stripped all the siding down and get it back to what it's going to look like in 1862. Next. This is the Miller barn. The house was over here. And this is the main thoroughfare. This is called the Hagerstown Pike. And this is where main fighting back and forth. And Lee used this thoroughfare. This was a turnpike, a macadamized road. It wasn't a mud road. It was kind of a gravelly road. So he used that road to move his troops. Like I said, he was greatly outnumbered, but Lee was playing a chess game against McClellan. Lee would move troops from right to left, left to right, as he needed them. And he used this road, the Hagerstown Road, to move his troops back and forth. The Union brought their artillery up next to the cornfield, and they were putting batteries of artillery and taking out some of the Confederates as they were moving through the corn. Next. This is a Texas monument. And I told you we had 16 people from the state of Texas on my tour. there were 4 regiments, or 3 regiments, excuse me, from Texas that fought in the cornfield. The 1st Texas, 4th Texas, and the 5th Texas. Now the first Texas went completely through the corn, defeated the Union Army, but in doing so took 82% casualties. 82% of that regiment was gone and done after the battle in the cornfield. Cornfield changed hands over 6 times in an hour's time, from 6 o'clock in the morning until about 7:15. And this was the Texas Monument right there. Next. And you can see now, this is General Hooker, who was in command of the Union Army, or the Union First Corps. Hooker was kind of they called him Fighting Joe Hooker. He had a little other problems, but he was kind of a fighting general. He liked to fight. He wasn't scared, but he was wounded about 8:30 in the morning in the foot, and he was taken from the battlefield, so his command kind of went away. But General Hood commanded the Texas, and they went back and forth. Next. And I always say this is right at the other end of the corn. You put a stake right here, and you go a radius of about 700 yards. In an hour and a half time, there are 8,000 casualties. There are 8,000 both Confederate and Union casualties in that area. Very bloody time from about 6:15 in the morning to about 7:30 in the morning. Next. Another part of the battlefield, this is still corn. This is called, there were 3 woods at that time. And now they're called the East, North, and West Woods, but at the time of the battle, they were named after the farmers who owned these woods. And the woods were not like we think of woods today. Woods were places where the farmers could get their fuel, their wood, make fences, fuel for their fires and things like that. So men could walk through them. It wasn't a dense woods as we think of it today. But this was the East Woods. Next. This is a monument to a Union general by the name of Mansfield. He was from the state of Connecticut. Now Mansfield served since the 1840s. He served in the Mexican War. He was a staff officer in Washington, D.C. When the war started. And he always wanted a command. He wanted a command in the battlefield. He didn't want to be a staff officer in Washington sitting behind a desk. And he kept bugging the Secretary of War. He kept bugging Abraham Lincoln. I'm a ranking general. I outrank most of all these generals. Give me a command in the field. You know, the old term, squeaky wheel gets the grease first. So finally, 4 days before the Battle of Antietam, they give Mansfield the command of the 12th Army Corps. And 12th Army Corps, their job was to back up General Hooker in the East Woods early in the morning. So Mansfield is out there. He's 62 years old, flowing white hair, like me, a flowing white horse, and he's in command of the 12th Corps. He's got 7,200 men behind him. What's a Corps commander supposed to be? Out in front? No, he's supposed to be in the back where he can tell his other leaders what they're supposed to do. But old Mansfield riding his white horse out into this area on this ridge out here, and he's leading his troops into battle. And he sees his troops firing what he thinks is firing into the Union men himself. He tells them to stop firing, but his troops come back and say, "No, General, those are the Confederates out there." So he turns around in his saddle, and his horse stands up in the saddle and looks out, and he says, "By God, you're right. Those are the Confederates." Boom. He's shot through the chest. He's gone. So his field command is about 4 days old. So poor old Jan, he got his chance. He probably died with a smile on his face because he had his command. But Mansfield is taken out, and the 12th Corps needs a new commander. So we got 1st Corps under Hooker needs a new commander, and we got Mansfield, 12th Corps needs a new commander. So it takes a while in Army at that period of time to move somebody else up to take command of that corps. So they lost a lot during that period of time. So this is about 7 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. Next. And this is, now we're moving into a different phase of the morning battle. Jackson was pretty well beaten. The Texas Brigade was beaten down. The Union Army 1st Corps and 12th Corps was pretty well beaten down. And about 9 o'clock, they said there was an eerie silence on the battlefield. All you could hear was the moaning of the dead, or the dead, not the dying and wounded men and wounded horses and that. there was another corps that was being brought in by the Union Army, the 12th Corps, and they were going to attack. And now this is the Westwoods. And you can see an obelisk right there, and that's to the Philadelphia Brigade. Next. We're going to have close to 5,000 men of the 1st Division of the 2nd Corps. And the most famous monument on the battlefield is the 15th Massachusetts. Now, the 15th Massachusetts had some great men. There was a lot of Harvard men there, Boston and places like that. And they were going to go into the Westwoods, and they were going to get beaten bad. Within 20 minutes, they're going to have 2,800 casualties of that whole Sedgwick's division. And this is the monument to the 15th Massachusetts, and we call it the Defiant Lion. He's wounded, but he's not dead, he's not done yet. And it sits right next to the road. When Karen and I go by out there, to get to the battlefield, we always go by the Defiant Lion and we give him the signal. You're not dead yet. A lot of famous men from Harvard fought in that. They took over 300 casualties of a regiment of 500, so they took a complete beating in the Westwoods. And by 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, they were beat back. Next. And that end phase of the battle, in the cornfield, the Westwoods, the Eastwoods, all kind of stopped. There are 3 salients of Antietam: the cornfield, the Sunken Road, and the Burnside Bridge. And now we're going to go to what we call the Sunken Road. And this is what it looks like today. Next. And we call it the Bloody Lane today. Before the battle, it was called Hog Trough Lane. It was a lane that they could use that would negate going through town. So the farmers could bring their wagons, some of their cattle and other things, move it. It was kind of a detour around the town of Sharpsburg. So they would use that, and it was called the Sunken Road, or the Hog Trough and Sunken Road, because the wagons would use it so much in the 1700s that it actually did sunk a little bit. And this is part of the sunken part of it. And the Confederates used this as a national defensive position. The Confederates moved in with Alabama troops in here and North Carolina troops in here. They probably had close to 3,800 troops through this battle. And the Union are going to make their attack into this sunken road, not knowing how many Confederates were in this road. They moved through the Muma Farm. This was the Muma Farm. The Muma family was a great farming family at that time. In fact, their house was burnt during the battle. So the Union Army was moving through the Muma Farm next and came through the Roulette Farm, which is also in that same area. These farms were actually the same buildings that were there during the battle. 12 years ago, this farm came up for sale. I could have bought it. And it's sad because the developer could have bought that right in the middle of our property or the battlefield. But luckily, we were able to get some funds and to buy that property, and that's part of our battlefield or your battlefield. And the battlefield was saved because of preservation trust and other people like that. But that's the Roulette Farm that was smack dab in the middle of the battlefield. Now the Union are going to make an attack. There was a famous brigade called the Irish Brigade out of New York. 63rd, 69th, 88th New York, and the 29th Massachusetts. We always said we had 3 Catholic regiment companies and then 1 Presbyterian. The chaplain of the Irish Brigade was Father Corby. Father Corby, before the Catholics went in the battle, would give them the blessing and say, do your duty, and if you turn and run from the enemy, you're going to be condemned to hell. So the Irish Brigade made their attempt. They lost about 75% of their men making an attack on that Sunken Road. Father Corby was at Gettysburg a year later, commanding the chaplain of the Irish Brigade. And after the war, there's a statue to him at Notre Dame. He became president of the University of Notre Dame after the war. Father Corby with the Irish Brigade. But the Irish Brigade is now coming over this hillside and they're attacking the Confederates down in this Sunken Road. Next. And this is a relief of the Irish Brigade monument. And it's one of the better monuments on the battlefield. And you can see the Irish flag here in McGraw as they're moving into battle against the Confederates in that Sunken Road. Next. One of the great Union generals General Richardson, who commanded the 3rd Division of the 2nd Corps. They called him Fighting Dick. He was a remnant of the Mexican-American War. After that, he was a farmer in Pontiac, Michigan. He was a West Point graduate, and when the war started, he came back and got his commission back, fought the Battle of the First Bull Run, and he's command of a division at the Sunken Road about noon on the 17th. He's directing some artillery being brought into that. He's on horseback and directing artillery, and he takes a shot right in the chest, and he's taken out. And probably one of the biggest calamities of the Union Army when he left, because I think if he would have been in command later on, the battle might have taken a different twist. So General Richardson is taken out about noon on the 17th. Next. We have a great vantage point on the battlefield. This is taken from a tower. The tower was not there during the battle. General Lee didn't use it, and General McClellan didn't use it, but this was put up in 1890 by the War Department. And they would bring cadets from West Point down, and they could observe topography and observe the tactics of that period of time. So it makes a great vantage point. Now this is the Sunken Road in its entirety. And it comes around here and curves around and goes this way. We talked about the Roulette Farm, which is over in here. The Muma Farm is over here. The Visitor Center would be up in here, which was the plateau with the Dunbridge Church. So this was the whole Sunken Road area, how it looks like today. Next. And the Confederates were pushed out of this about 12:30 in the afternoon on the 17th. They took great casualties in the Sunken Road. And they were retreating down this hillside into the Piper Farm. There's an orchard here. So they're retreating, and the Union Army is pushing them back. And the town of Sharpsburg was within a half a mile. So they could have got there and cut off Lee's retreat. The battle might have ended a little bit differently. Next. And this is Piper Farm, as we're looking as a Union soldier, and he's moving in. And this is the Piper buildings, and this is the town. Smack dab in the middle is their water tower, so you can see how close it was. And the Union Army objective was to take the town of Sharpsburg and cut off the retreat of Lee back into Virginia. And they came very close. And my belief is that General Richardson wouldn't have been taken out at that period of time. They might have done it. Next. And this is the Piper Farm. Farmhouse. It was there during the battle. General Longstreet, who was a Confederate general, had his headquarters there. And it was a Union or Confederate hospital during and after the battle. Next. And this is a little monument to Virginia. And there was a couple of cannon that were abandoned, and a Virginia lieutenant came up and grabbed those cannon and put them into service. And General Longstreet came up and put his corps, his adjutants, in charge of the cannon. And actually Longstreet was chomping on his cigar, and he was holding the horses as these adjutants were manning the cannon to stem the Union charge. But it's just a little monument. It's only about 2 feet high, but this is one of the Confederate monuments on the battlefield. This is the 132nd Pennsylvania monument in the Sunken Road. The Sunken Road right here. They had a problem before they went into battle. They came across the Roulette Farm, and the Roulettes had beehives. And they were marching through the farm area, and a Confederate artillery shell hit one of the beehives. Bees didn't like that. So, and bees are swarming against all these soldiers, and they got more problems with the bees than they do with Confederate musket fighters. But this was the 132nd Pennsylvania. Next. Now we'll go to the last phase, which was middle afternoon, late afternoon of the 17th. It's called the Lower Bridge, Rohrbach Bridge, or we consider it today, it's called the Burnside Bridge. Again, this was built in the 1830s, handled traffic until the 1960s. I still say this is the most photographed bridge in American history. Crosses the Antietam Creek. And the Confederates have to hold that bridge. If the bridge is taken, the whole right of the Confederate line could be let loose, and the Union would be able to get into town. So this was a main focal point in the battle from early morning or middle morning till late afternoon of the 17th across this bridge. And It still stands today. I've seen water all the way up to here with some of the floods. When Hurricane Sandy came through last year, there was great flooding in this area, and there was actually water over here. Next. Now the Confederates, that's about 400 Georgians up on that hillside. This is Confederate position. And they held that from 7 o'clock in the morning until about noon. 400 troops against 9,000 Union troops are down in this area. Why? They held the high ground. There were natural rifle pits in here. They sat there with their sharpshooters, and anybody that tried to cross that bridge were taken out. So after 3 charges across the bridge, trying to get to the bridge, about 12:30 in the morning, afternoon, the Union were finally able to get across the bridge and establish a bridgehead on the other side. I tell my people when I take them on a tour, you always remember this Burnside Bridge. This is a castle. That's the drawbridge. And there's the moat, the Antietam Creek right in front of it. So it's like biblical times or medieval times. So the Confederates were up in their castle and shooting away at the Union who were trying to get across there. Next. The Union came down this road trying to get across that bridge, and they were just peppered by Confederate sharpshooters on that hillside, and they couldn't get very close to the bridge. Next. Finally, about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 brigades, or 2 regiments, the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York, were able to get across that bridge and establish a bridgehead on the other side. And then the Confederates had to pull back, and they had to move back to their final line. Next. This is the 51st Pennsylvania Monument, snare drum. Next. This is the 51st New York. Now I tell you, who had more money for their monuments? New York or Pennsylvania? The New York monument had, hands down, the bigger the monuments. But they both fought gallantly there. The 251st, Pennsylvania and New York, finally decided they had enough and said, we're going to cross that bridge. So across that bridge they did, and by 1:30 they established their bridgehead on the other side, and the Confederates had to pull back. Next. This is the terrain. It changes from the cornfield, which is very flat where the battle began. Now it's in a very ravine, hilly terrain. This is the Sherrick Farm, where the Union Army was trying to get across there. And again, you can see the terrain, very hillside, very ravine. And so the Union Army is now trying to get into this area. The Confederates had their cannons up on this hillside, and they're defending this in the late afternoon on the 17th. Next. This is the 11th Ohio Monument down in the valley. They came across here making their attempt. Next. I didn't focus this very well. I focused on the wheat and forgot about the monument. I'm not a professional photographer, but the left flank of the Confederate Union Army was the 16th Connecticut. They'd only been in the Army about a month. They'd never seen combat, and most of them never fired their weapon against anybody. So they are the extreme left flank. They're protecting the left flank of the Union Army on the later in the afternoon on the 17th. And it's going pretty well for the Union Army. They're actually pushing back the Confederates, and they can see, the Union Army can see victory. And about 4:30 in the afternoon, they can see their way into town. And if they, like I said before, if they could get into town and cut off the escape route of General Lee, he's caught in the trap. Lee had an ace in the hole. He had a division that was in Harper's Ferry. They were down there paroling the troops the 16th and 17th. And early in the morning of the 17th, General Lee sent a courier down the AP Hill and said, get your division up here as fast as you can get them up here. So we started up about 7 o'clock in the morning. And about 4:30 in the afternoon, 2,300 Confederates crossed the Potomac River from Harper's Ferry and smashed right into the left flank of this green unit, 16th Connecticut, and just rolled them up. Rolled with them the 4th Rhode Island. And the whole thing was like a rapper, just wrapped itself up, and the whole Union Army just kind of fled. And they were hit in the flank at 4:30 in the afternoon. They came that close to winning the battle, but they came with the advent of the AP Hills Corps. They lost the battle and lost the day. Next. This is, the farthest that the Union Army got. This is the 9th New York Zouaves. Their monument was the high water mark of the battle. They were beaten down. They took about 60% casualties. And they say the town is right within 50, 60 yards. They could have penetrated, they could have won the battle. But they didn't. They couldn't hold that area because they ran out of their troops. And when the sun went down on the 17th, about 6 o'clock at night, the battle ended, and 23,000 men, both north and south, were casualties on the battlefield. What did they gain? They gained nothing. Both armies were in about the same area that they had started in the early morning. This is 6 o'clock in the morning when it started, and 6 o'clock at night, so it was only one day, it wasn't even a day. It was 12 hours, 23,000 casualties. Both men suffered greatly. The 18th, the next day, both armies looked at each other. They didn't do anything. General Lee thought there would be a counterattack by McClellan. McClellan thought there would be a counterattack by Lee, but no, both armies were beat. They're like two professional boxers. They've gone 15 rounds and they can't do it anymore. So they were both regrouping. On the night of the 18th, Robert E. Lee had a conference with the rest of his generals, and he asked their opinion. And most of the opinion was that we cannot take another defeat, so we should retreat. So they held their retreat area, and they retreated back into Shepherdstown, Virginia at that time, back into Virginia. So the Battle of Antietam ended on the 18th. McClellan wanted to counterattack, but he wanted to attack on the 19th, but when he looked on the 19th, there was nobody there to attack. The Confederates had pulled back. McClellan used this as a great victory. He telegraphed back to Lincoln and said, "We've done what we wanted to do. We defeated the Confederate Army, thrown them back into Virginia." All right, he did that. But did he end the war? No, the war didn't end in 1862. But there was something that happened because of the Battle of Antietam that changed the war. Lincoln had the Emancipation Proclamation on his desk. He had it written. And this was to free the slaves in the opposing counties of the Confederacy. His cabinet said you cannot issue that unless we win a victory. You know, you issue it when you're a beaten army, and it doesn't mean much. But if you have a victory, then maybe you can issue this emancipation. So Lincoln used this pseudo-victory at Antietam to issue the proclamation, his Emancipation Proclamation. It was issued on the 23rd of September, 1862. Went into effect on 1 January, 1863. And it changed how this war was viewed by a lot of people. Before, it was states' rights. You know, the Southerners wanted their states' rights, and that. Now it's a war for mankind. You got an oppressed nation, you have the Negroes, the blacks, and slavery, and the whole change. It all changes. England and France, who were tottering, and they might have came in on the side of the South, wanted no part of it after the Emancipation Proclamation. England had got rid of slavery in the 1850s, had no part of it. So England and France said, we don't want any part of this anymore. So because of this victory, so-called victory that McClellan won at Antietam, emancipation, and it changed how the Civil War was fought later on. So these men perished, 23,000 casualties. 8,000 died immediately. The rest of them were in hospitals and places like that. So it did do something, but it was a very costly day for both armies. Next, after the battle, the war didn't end. 1862 didn't win until 1865. In fact, Lincoln came out to the battlefield in October, and the Union Army hadn't moved since September. And he basically came out to see General McClellan and say, General McClellan, how come you let Lee escape into Virginia? You didn't counterattack. You had him by the grasp and we couldn't end the war. And McClellan couldn't give him a good answer because McClellan was not, he wasn't a fighting type of general. He liked to organize, but he wasn't on the fighter. And Lincoln came out there with a famous picture taken of him with McClellan and the staff officers. And my hero, Jonathan Letterman, was there. He was the medical director of the Army of the Potomac, of the Union Army. And Lincoln went to Dr. Letterman and said, "Will you take me into the hospital? I want to see some of the wounded troops, both Union and Southern troops." Basically, wanted to see some Southern troops talk. So Dr. Letterman said, "Yes, sir." We come into the hospital, and there was a young man laying on a bed, and the doctors who were attending him said this young man probably will not live through the night. And Lincoln came and asked Dr. McClellan or Dr. Letterman if he could talk to him. He said, "You're the commander-in-chief, you do whatever you want, really." So Lincoln knelt down, again, right to the man, and they had about a 3-minute conversation. Nobody heard what was going back between the 17-year-old Confederate boy and the President of the United States. After about 3 minutes, Lincoln got back up 6'4", and there were tears coming down the President's face. And he turned to Dr. Letterman and he said, "When will this war ever end? When will it ever end?" And this is 1862. It's not going to end until 1865. And more casualties. Over 680,000 men are going to perish because of it. 1867, after the war was over, there was a national cemetery established at Antietam. This is the monument. It's called the Union Soldier Monument. This is Old Simon. He's 24 feet tall, 40 feet in the whole top. He's the largest monument to a soldier in the Civil War, and it's the federal cemetery there at Antietam. Next, there are 4,000 graves. Next. Oh, you went by that. Oh, you're really missing.
I'm speeding up.
Back up.
No, I can't.
You're going the wrong way.
I know. All right.
The arrow was left.
I did try that. Going left. And it didn't work.
Back. There you go. Maybe. Oh, all right. This little human interest story. When I give my tours, we got some children with us. This is Werner Van Buckeli. He was the 6th Wisconsin, not too far from up the road in the Monroe area, 6th Wisconsin. He was the captain of the 6th Wisconsin. He had a pet dog, a Newfoundland dog. You know, a Newfoundland's a big black dog, standing about this high. And he taught the dog to sit and salute. The dog would salute. So he was kind of the mascot of the 6th Wisconsin. The captain was moving his troops up through the cornfield on the Hagerstown Road and was killed. Shot down in the road. The dog came over and laid across his master. The battle ebbed and flowed back and forth, and when that part of the battle ended, the dog also was dead. He was shot by straight artillery or state what. So the captain was buried not too far in the Miller farmyard with the dog. So when they reinterred the Union soldiers in 1867, they took the captain from his grave and the dog's bones, and they put him in the National Cemetery. So now we know that there is a pup dog laying in state with the captain in the National Cemetery in Antietam. So that's Captain Van Buckeli and his pup dog, Newfoundland. Next. This is another monument. This is the 20th New York Monument. Next. Again, the Old Simon. Next. The cemetery was closed after the Korean War. Nobody could be buried there. It was kind of taken up by room. But a young man from a town very close to Sharpsburg, the town of Keedysville, Patrick Howard Roy, was killed in the coal incident in 2000. The terrorist attack on the ship. And so they allowed him to be buried in the National Cemetery at Antietam. So this is his grave, Patrick Roy, seaman on the USS Cole. Next. Then we talk about some of the roads. This is the Keedysville Road, which is an evacuation road from the hospitals. Next. we use the term witness tree. This is the old road that led into the battle and also out of the battle. And this is a big old oak tree, and this tree was there during the battle. Not as big as it was, probably about 20 years old at that period of time. Now it's over 170 years, but this is a witness tree of the battle. We talked about Keedysville, which was a town about 2 miles away, which was a big hospital center for the Union Army. All the wounded were taken off the battlefield and moved into this little town of Keedysville. Next. This church, this was a Lutheran church, Reformed Lutheran church, was used as a hospital. Next. The German Reformed church was a hospital. They talked about the windows were open, the amputations were going on inside the church, and the arms and limbs were being thrown out of the windows into a big pit where they were buried later on. Next. This was an old schoolhouse in Keedysville, also used as a hospital. Next. One of the bigger hospitals that lasted about 3 months after the battle, until December, the Locust Spring Hospital, which had over 6,000 casualties in and around that area. Next. This was the morgue. They took the dead bodies from the hospital, put them in there until they could be buried in the cemetery. Next. This is a hospital that is still a private residence today. This is the Fry Mill Hospital. About 680 casualties of Union there. Next. Cost House is right across the street, still in existence today. Close to 1,000 casualties in and around that house. I've been in the house and you can actually see blood stains on the floor in the parlor. Next. The Samuel Potenberger Farm, which stood there during the battle. And this is where Clara Martin came to the battlefield the day after the battle, brought in wagon loads of supplies, medical supplies and other things for his troops. And she came to this house and she used this as her headquarters to donate the supplies in and out the area to the medical corps of the Union Army at that time. And also, we were treating the Confederate officers, Confederate troops also. But this is the Sam Potenberger Farm. Next. Hoffman Farm, the battle was raging on the other side. This was used as a big hospital, over 1,200 casualties there. Next. Potenberger Farm, we talked about a little bit earlier. These are all still there. Some of them the park owns and some don't. Next. This is the Line Farm. This is where there's a house back in here. We can't get back to private property to see the house, but there's a house back in there where General Mansfield was taken when he was wounded earlier today. Next. The Red Brick Hospital, named after the red bricks that are named at the hospital. Great little turkey farm in there, if you like turkey. Thanksgiving and Christmas night. And we talked about the Roulette Farm and the beehives. Beehives are found in this area here. The barn was used as a field hospital, Union. Next. And we talked about monuments. We don't have that many. This is the Great New York Monument. This is the main monument to the New York troops. Next. This is the Indiana troops. Next. This is Maryland. Maryland Monument. And this is both sides. There were Maryland troops that were on the southern side and Maryland troops on the northern side. So this monument is to both sides of the battle. Next. Clara Martin, we talked about her. This is her monument on the battlefield. And it's a plaque to Clara Martin. You see a little red cross. That was taken, the bricks for that were taken from her house in Massachusetts where she was born. But that's her monument on the battlefield at Antietam. Next. This is to the Irish Brigade, General Mahar. 1997, there's not supposed to be any more monuments put up in the battlefield. But the Irish Brigade, the Irish people thought, well, you can't tell the Irish, any Irish monument. You can't tell the Irish can't have a monument. So they had a benefactor who was kind of high up in the government at that time by the name of Teddy Kennedy. So he put his name behind it. So in 1997, the Irish Brigade had their monument put up. Next. This is an Ohio monument. A lot of Ohio troops. There were very little Illinois. There was the 8th Illinois, the 12th Illinois Cavalry, basically the 8th Illinois, but there were very little Illinois troops at the battle or the Antietam campaign. Next. Great monument. Big, 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 big. To a commissary sergeant. Now, how does a commissary sergeant get a monument of that size? Well, he was a sergeant of the 23rd Ohio. But after the war, he survived, and next, he became president of the United States. William McKinley. And on the relief of the monument, you can see his commissary wagon, and you can see Sergeant McKinley with big pails of coffee and other things that he's given to the troops after they'd taken Burnside Bridge. 23rd Ohio has the distinction of having two future presidents, McKinley and Russell B. Hayes. Russell B. Hayes fought at the Battle of South Mountain, was wounded in the arm, so he didn't take part in the Battle of Antietam, but he was part of the Antietam campaign. And McKinley took part, and he was month after he was commissioned as lieutenant, and he became president of the United States later on. So that's why he had this big money. You'll see these cannon if you go to Antietam. There's 6 of them. They're called mortuary cannon. It designates the place where a general officer was shot down. There are 3 Confederates and 3 Unions. This is a Union. This is General Rodman, who up at the high water mark lost his life. So you can see inverted cannon. So you see 6 of these on the battlefield at Antietam. Next. This is a different one. This is a Confederate, General Branch, who was killed at late in the day at the same time that Rodman was shot down. So you see these inverted cannons. Next. And we talked about 1988, not too far long ago, that they discovered some bones on the battlefield, private property. They brought out archaeological people, they dug these up, and they discovered that they were part of the Irish Brigade that fought against the Sunken Road. They dug up their remnants of their bodies, and then they were placed in the National Cemetery in 1989. 3 years ago, on the battlefield, a man was walking the cornfield, and the cornfield is littered with groundhog holes. In fact, if you walk there, you got to be careful. If you fall in one of those, you're going to break your leg. So he was walking through the cornfield, and he noticed that there's a big groundhog hole, and he noticed there were some bones that the groundhog, as he's digging, had brought out. So he reached down and looked at one and said, well, that's got to be a deer, it's got to be some kind of... But something in his mind said, well... So he took it to the park office. They looked at it and said, So they sent it down to D.C. to the Institute of Pathology. They ascertained that it was a human bone, and it was from that period of time. So they did a cordon off the area, and they started doing digs there. And they found some more bones, and they found some buttons with New York insignia on them. So they knew that this was maybe a New York soldier who had been misplaced, never found where he was buried on the battlefield, and 3 years ago they dug up as much as they could, put it in a coffin and sent it back to New York, where he interred in the National Cemetery in New York. Next. Unique monuments. This is 3 rifles and a coffee boiler. This is to the 90th Pennsylvania. Call this the hot spot. Smack dab in the middle of the cornfield almost, and you can see it was a hot spot. But, this is a kind of a unique monument to the 90th Pennsylvania. Next. This is the Grove Farm. This is where Lincoln came and had a talk with McClellan, and also where Letterman took him into the hospital. Next. Here's McKelly again. Next. Newcomer House. This is now a visitor welcoming center, so people can go and find out where we can see other parts of the battlefield. We use that now, but it was a house and a hospital during the battle. Next. This little town of Sharpsburg, at the time of the battle, it was 1,300 people. This is the town square at the crossroads. Today it's about 1,800. Hasn't changed much. You can see original houses. There's an original church there. Over here is the headquarters of General Lee. But this was the crossroads of Sharpsburg, Maryland. Next. Gotta go for ice cream. Greatest ice cream parlor in the whole world. You go there on the weekend, you hardly get in the place. But this is another ice cream, and it's just great ice cream there. And you get a scoop, or my God, you can't eat it all for not very much money. But another's ice cream parlor. So if you go there, you gotta go to another. All the guys go there and all this kind of stuff. Next. Best burgers in town. Captain Bender's. It's a bar, but they got good burgers and things like that, so it's a good place to go in the middle of town. Next. If you like B&Bs, this is the Antietam, Inn at Antietam. Great little B&B, or great big B&B. Nice place to stay. Next, this is the Joseph Rohrbach bed and breakfast place. Stayed there many times. Next, this is the Antietam guest house. Karen and I stayed there many times until we got a little apartment out there now, so we don't stay in these places, but it's a great place to stay. Next, another place you gotta go. Amish Bakery. Oh, Karen will tell you all about that. Cookies, bread, you name it, they got it. Pie. But Burkholders, you gotta go there for their bakery goods. Next. Red Bird, that's where a lot of the guys go for lunch. Next. Battleview Restaurant, or Battleview Cafe, good place to eat, get your beer there if you need it. Next. If you really want to impress your wife or your girlfriend, you take them up on the South Mountain, on the South Mountain Inn. It's a great eatery at night, and it's ambiance there. That house was there, the headquarters during the Battle of the South Mountain. It stood there since the 1700s. Across the street, it's a neat little place. It's a church. A woman who lost a son during the Civil War, by the name of Dahlgren, and she had that church erected in memory of her son, called the Dahlgren Chapel. It was a Catholic chapel at that time, now it's interdenominational. But Karen and I have a special affinity to that church because our son Doug was married in that church. In Boonesboro, which is the next town about 6 miles from the battlefield, this is a B&B. And who runs that, Karen?
Nora Roberts.
Lauren Roberts. Anybody heard of Lauren Roberts? Who writes all those romantic novels.
She's from Brandon. So she built, and read the Boonesboro trilogy. Talk about building this.
But she does a lot. She uses her money. She must have a lot because she has restored most of all Boonesboro. That whole corner there is what she's done. She's restored that. That was a hotel. Lee had his headquarters there at the Battle of South Mountain. Coming in, and because of it, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued and changed the way the war took its toll later on. So it's a great place to go, and I hope you get a chance to go there someday. And I'd love to take you on a tour myself. So we pull up the lights. If you have any questions? Any questions on our little tour? Yes, sir.
I've been to some of those battlefields and seen the monuments.
Yes.
I was always curious, was there a criteria, or is there criteria for a monument, and how are monuments funded? I mean, are they funded by states, or are they?
Question is, the monuments were put up. Most of the monuments were put up in the 1880s, 1890s by the states. And also what we call the GAR. Ever heard of the GAR? The Grand Army Republic. After the Civil War, all the veterans came back. They had a lot of political pull. And they had a lot of money. So the states, and they would get the states to put up the monuments on the battlefields to the veterans there. And a lot of the veterans would go there and place the monument where they were.
And my other question had to do with the battlefields and the cemeteries that are there. I always wondered whether there are actually people in the, buried in the cemeteries, because, people like you talk about 24,000 people being killed, 80% of regiments being killed. Well, then I know it's kind of gross, but I think about 24,000 people laying there, and how did they get from there into a cemetery when 80% of them got killed?
Good question. Especially with the Union, the Army who controlled the battlefield after the battle, it was their responsibility to get rid of the dead. So after the Battle of Antietam, who controlled the battlefield? The Union. So they would bury their Union troops. Now, there was no dog tags that period of time. So who's who? All right, some men had a pseudo dog tag made by themselves, a jeweler, and had their name on it around their neck. So then they would be identified, they would be buried, they would put a stake in the ground with a piece of wood and identify Joe Blow, Company A, da-da-da-da. A lot of private soldiers, Union Army, before they went into battle, they would take a piece of paper, write their name and their unit, and pin it to the back of their uniform. So if they went down, they would be identified, maybe. So they were placed in the ground. All right. Confederates were left on the battlefield, dead Confederates. Big pits. They just dug big pits, put them all in that. Later on, they were reinterred. There was a cemetery in now called West Virginia, Shepherdstown. There's a lot of Confederate buried there, reburied. Most times they just buried you where you went. Push you under the ground, get you out of the way. And then a couple years later, when the National Cemetery was formed in 1867, they started moving the Union into the National Cemetery. They found no Confederates in the National Cemetery. Union, GIR, no, we can't have a Confederate. So they were usually taken to West Virginia, or Virginia, to Hagerstown, Maryland, and some of them taken back to Richmond. So you don't know who's there. If they were identified, okay, like we have Captain Kelly who's there, he probably identified. As we say, there's this burial. That's unknown. You go to Gettysburg National Cemetery, you see unknown. Just a number. You don't know. You really don't know who's buried underneath that. It's sad to say, they made mistakes in Arlington the last few years. They misinterpreted. You talk about it. Whew. You know, but that's the way it is you don't know. You hope that that's who's there, that's your relative.
So in these neat little rows in the Confederate cemeteries, or even in the Union cemeteries, there may just be a few bones of somebody in those spots.
Yeah.
Okay. And also, my last question. You talked about, one general communicated with the other general. Did they just send somebody on horseback to do that?
Yeah, couriers. Later on, they started using telegraph. The telegraph was brand new at that period of time. But the general would be courier. McClellan would be up his headquarters, and say Burnside was 2 miles away. So they would send out 3 couriers. Hopefully one would get through. And they would get on your horse and take a courier down there and send them. That's how they moved. We also had signal flags. They had signal flags in Antietam. On the high places of the Red Hill, there was a signal flag up here, and they could communicate from that high point up there. They could watch the Confederates, and they would signal flag the Army headquarters back at the Fry House in McClellan. So they would wigwag their signal back and forth. And sometimes they'd wigwag it back to the generals on the field. But battle, you got mass confusion. You got, ravines, you got smoke. Black powder is just full of smoke. Noise, communication is impossible almost, how you're going to communicate. So you're feeling your way around the battle. Battle is, in the Civil War, is chaos. You don't know what's going on the other side of the field. I have a place down where I start my tour. I take them on a 50-yard walk. We're up at the visitor center. They can see the Dunker Church. They can see the New York Monument. You can see the North Woods. You can see all that. 50 yards down, you can't see anything. You're down on the ravine. So you can't see what's going on the other side of the place. You can't see it. Number one, you got all this smoke and noise and confusion. It's chaos. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
South Mountain.
South Mountain.
Now there's a mountain between Hagerstown and Frederick.
Yeah.
And is that the south? That's called South Mountain out there. Is that where that battle took place, or
Yes.
is that closer to?
South Mountain is from Frederick to Antietam is 35 miles as a crow flies. South Mountain bisects it. Almost a day. So that's the dividing line between Frederick and Boonesboro and Antietam. So that was the barrier between the two armies.
Is there a battlefield?
There's a battlefield. It's not as well preserved as Antietam, but there are markers there at the Battle of South Mountain. And there were three gaps through the South Mountain. With 4, actually. The northernmost was Frosttown Gap. Not much happened there. The next gap is Turner's Gap. That's where that restaurant I showed you, South Mountain Inn. That was where the main road went across, the National Pike, 50, 40. And then a mile from there is Fox's Gap. And then 6 miles from there down the road is Crampton's Gap. So Turner, Fox, and Crampton all were in part of the South Mountain Battle on the 14th, which was a Sunday, 14th of September, 2 days before the battle, 2.5 days before the battle of Antietam. And that was the barrier. I didn't get into why Harper's Ferry. You know, that's a whole different, we'd be here till midnight. But when Lee came to Frederick, as I say, he marched into Frederick on the 7th of September. He pulled a bone and says, I'm here. 50 miles away is Washington, D.C. And Lee's here and said, what are you going to do about it? And McClellan is trying to get an army, and his job is, well, okay, what am I trying to protect? You know, Lee's up there in Frederick. I got Washington to protect. I got Pennsylvania to protect, and I got Baltimore to protect. Now, how am I going to protect all these 3? So he starts moving his army cautiously out of Washington, D.C., trying to protect Baltimore. He's trying to protect Washington on the back end, and he's trying to do all this with 70,000 men. And here's Lee up on the South Mountain. But Lee has a problem 17 miles away at Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry is a Union garrison of 14,000 men on his supply line. You can't have the enemy on your supply line. Even General Lee knew that. He couldn't fight that. So that's when he divided his army. He sent Jackson down to get rid of the problem at Harper's Ferry and do it in a couple days, and then regroup, come back up to South Mountain area, Hagerstown, and then we're going to proceed into Pennsylvania. Harper's Ferry didn't fall on the 12th. It didn't fall on the 13th. It didn't fall on the 14th. And after Lee lost on the South Mountain, Lee was in a pickle. He'd lost a battle on the South Mountain. Jackson's still down there with 3/4 of his army, and Harper's Ferry hasn't fallen. So Lee comes back and, oh my God, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. And his only way out is through Sharpsburg and across the ford of Potomac River, Shepherdstown. In fact, he issued an order to General McLaws, said, come on back, we got to get out of here, Jackson. But then a half hour later, the courier comes up from Jackson from Harper's Ferry, and he says, by the grace of God, tomorrow on Sunday the 15th, Harper's Ferry will fall. On Monday. And it did. Harper's Ferry surrendered on the 15th of September. Aha, Lee's sitting there in Sharpsburg. Okay. He sends the courier down to Jackson, get your body up here as fast as you can, bring up all those troops. So Jackson, he's moving up, but he leaves A.P. Hill down there to roll the troops. So on the 15th and 16th, Lee sets his perimeter. He does not dig. He doesn't dig any fortifications. He still wants to move north. He wants to use that Hagerstown Pike to get 10 miles up to get to Hagerstown. That's where he wanted to fight, behind a little place called Beaver Creek. But then, it's on the 16th, night of the 16th, McClellan brings Hooker in and closes off the Hagerstown Pike to the north, and Lee cannot get out of there. He can't go north. So it's shut down, so now he's got to fight on the 17th. Lee could not afford the Battle of Sharpsburg or the Battle of Antietam. He could not afford 36% casualties. His army couldn't sustain it. The Union Army they took 27% casualties, but they could sustain it because they had more men coming in. Lee, a lot of historians said Lee should have pulled out. He should have pulled back into Maryland without the Battle of Antietam. But Lee had a contempt, utter contempt for McClellan. Utter. I can beat McClellan anytime, any place, anywhere. And that's why he stayed and fought in that. And Lee couldn't go back. He didn't want to go back to Virginia without fighting. he accomplished his goals, he did everything he wanted. He took Harper's Ferry at 14,000 troops, captured over 200 cannon. Huh, he had a gold mine. But he wanted to fight the country, he wanted to be it again. Any other? Yes, ma'am.
When are you gonna have another trip?
Pardon?
When are you gonna do another trip? We were
I'm gonna be out there in 2 weeks. Talk to the boss, she ran the trip. I'm just a guy.
We were planning on going last year and it was canceled.
Yeah, we didn't have enough people to go, but we had some great trips out there. I would love to take a group out there again. Just do that. South Mountain. South Mountain. The best time to go to South Mountain is in March or November. After the frost. South Mountain's still a mountainous area, and they got a lot of these little critters, copperheads. So you want to stay away from them in the summertime. South Mountain, there are some markers there. It's not as well laid out as Antietam, but it's kind of a forgotten battlefield. Everybody thinks of Antietam, but they forget about the Battle of South Mountain. Yes, ma'am.
Is South Mountain where they have the statue of the captain that knew that they were in trouble because the South could shoot up at them?
No, there's a monument to war correspondence on the top of.
Yeah, no, I'm
You got
trying to
different-
remember what, because we wanted to see that. He was a captain, and he's the one that decided, hey, you know, the other guys had moved out, and he said, the South is gonna come up and, you know, they can shoot at us, and
You got it. Captain. Can't figure that one out.
there's a statue.
The statue in South Mountain?
No, I'm not in South, evidently this is not South Mountain, but I'm trying to remember where that was.
He's
Okay.
talking about Warren at Gettysburg.
Gettysburg.
Because mentioning the snakes reminded me, you had said before we got out of the bus, if you snow cucumber, get out of there.
Oh. I can't remember. You got me. Any others? Thank you for a great audience.
Probably this is my dessert for my breakfast, for my dinner, I guess it was. Gordon, I want to thank you very much for returning. Also, I want to remind you, we have another Civil War program coming up in June, when the Friends, Vicki and Don Friends will be here, and they will be discussing the life of the average, the common soldier, and also Don is pretty good on the period instruments, playing some Civil War songs.
Yeah,
He's pretty good at it.
he's got good artifacts.
Yeah, he is going to, in fact, we've got some of his artifacts downstairs in our local Civil War exhibit, but he's promised that he's going to bring perhaps several tables full, which will be in this room. And that'll be on the Tuesdays, June, I want to say 27th? I'm just guessing. Okay. Anyway, on your way down, you can pick up one of our brochures, which has got the date. It'll be the same time, 7:30 up here. No charge to ride the elevator up and down. Anyway, the food is out there. Grab some. Yes, I'm sorry.
Can I say a word or two?
Oh, yeah, this gentleman you recognize from the trust.
Yeah.
I'm Aubrey Olson, and I happen to have a brochure here where we're trying to get signatures to get matching funds for the Civil War Trust Fund. They buy property, restore it to Civil War periods, and if they get money and the trust fund is matched by the federal government, after it's restored, they give it back to the National Park Service. So the government gets it at half price, if you want to look at it that way. And I've got places here for signatures.
Put it down on the reception desk so that everybody will see it, and they can sign it there.
Okay.
Every penny that's donated that goes to Preservation Trust. It's a great organization. I support it, and everybody supports it. It doesn't go into some coffer or some higher way to get it. Every penny goes into the battlefield preservation.
Okay, thank you very much.